Hello, my name is Melissa. I'm 64 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life had been filled with quiet loneliness. My husband was always away on business trips, and the house felt emptier with each passing day. One evening, after years of hoping for a little companionship, I finally mustered the courage to ask if I could adopt a dog. I thought maybe, just maybe, a small soul could fill the silence with warmth. Instead, he let out a harsh, mocking laugh, his eyes gleaming with contempt, and sneered. "Fix this old car by yourself and you can adopt your stupid dog." His words were cruel, but in that moment, something inside me sparked. I realized that if I wanted love, happiness, and a little joy in my life, I would have to claim it for myself. I took a deep breath, wiped away the sting of his words, and did the unthinkable. It wasn't just about fixing a vehicle, it was about reclaiming a piece of my life, proving to myself that I could overcome fear, doubt, and even cruelty. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your comments and knowing where you are. Now, let's understand how this story really began. I never thought a quiet afternoon in my dining room could feel so heavy. The sun poured through the lace curtains, gilding the edges of the table where I sat alone, setting out the plates as carefully as I could. The silverware reflected the dim light, and I arranged the napkins just so, though no one would notice. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, though there were traces of it in the subtle stiffness of my fingers, but from the ever-present ache of loneliness. I pressed a folded note into the center of the table, thinking Gerald might see it when he finally came home. I always hoped for him to notice me, to hear the small whispers of my heart. "Gerald," I murmured softly, as if speaking to the empty room could summon him. "I've been thinking, you're away so much. I'd love some company. Maybe we could finally adopt a dog?" His laughter, when it came, was not the warm, easy laughter of shared joy. It was cold, precise, cutting through the fragile hope I'd built in my chest. He didn't even look up from the phone clutched in his hand. "A dog?" he said, chuckling cruelly, a tilt of his head expressing disbelief. Or maybe contempt. "Fix that piece of junk falcon in the garage by yourself, and then you can have your stupid mutt." The words struck me like ice against bare skin. Then he left. Just like that. The sound of his expensive shoes fading down the hallway left a hollow echo in the room. I stared at the doorway long after he disappeared, a silent witness to my own insignificance in the life I thought I shared. My gaze drifted slowly to the garage, where the old car sat like a forgotten relic of another life. Dust thick upon its surface, windows clouded with the years I had spent unnoticed. 3 weeks passed in a blur of quiet desperation and stubborn determination. I donned overalls, grease smeared my cheeks, and I watched countless YouTube tutorials, the screen propped precariously on the fender of that old Falcon. The sun would rise and fall while I worked. The parts were scattered across the driveway like tiny fragments of a puzzle I was slowly learning to solve. My daughter Patricia's voice sliced through the air more than once, sharp and judgmental. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself," she said, the designer coat she wore marking her distance from my world, her words dripping with the superiority I'd longed to ignore. But I ignored her. I had to. Every bolt I tightened, every hesitant turn of a wrench, was a quiet rebellion against the life that had tried to confine me to invisibility. At 2 a.m, hands trembling and eyes stinging from exhaustion, I placed the final bolt. I held my breath as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, vibrating sound that made the air in the garage shimmer. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't just tears of relief. They were tears of triumph, of a silent, personal victory over the years of neglect, the dismissals, the underestimations. Buddy, who had not yet entered my life, would have been proud, I thought. I sank to the floor and let the sound of that purring engine fill the emptiness that Gerald had left behind. When Gerald returned that evening, he froze. The sound of the engine had traveled down the driveway, and I could see the color drain from his face, the muscles of his jaw tightening in disbelief. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, the venom thinly disguised beneath his words. "Get your damn dog. Just keep it away from me." He stormed past me, leaving only the echo of his authority behind. The very next morning, I found myself standing at the animal shelter, the sunlight catching the dust motes in the air like tiny stars. My heart raced as I scanned the kennels, my fingers trembling despite the warmth of the spring morning. And then I saw him, scruffy, soulful eyes that seemed to look directly into the depths of my heart. His tail thumped once, twice, as if acknowledging the instant connection between us. "His name's Buddy," the shelter worker said gently. "He's been here almost a year." Driving home, the old Falcon carrying both of us, I felt a sense of fragile hope. Buddy rode shotgun, his head barely reaching the window, his eyes wide and trusting. I smiled, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, a little less lonely. But then I noticed it, a thick, sealed envelope sliding from under the passenger seat. My breath caught, a chill crawling down my spine. I reached for it, hands shaking, and knew in my bones that this quiet, victorious morning would be the threshold to a storm I was only beginning to understand. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands, though it was little more than thick paper. The seal had a faint, stubborn resistance, as if it knew what it contained should not be seen. Buddy's eyes followed every movement of my fingers, dark and intelligent, almost reading my thoughts before I could formulate them. I carefully tore open the envelope and unfolded the documents inside, one after another. My eyes skimmed the neat rows of numbers, the months and years meticulously recorded until my stomach dropped, and a cold, hollow pit seemed to open beneath me. $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, transferred, month after month for 5 long years to an unknown account. 5 years of quiet theft hidden in plain sight, and not a single voice in the world had noticed, except mine, now, trembling as I tried to comprehend the betrayal. Buddy nudged my hand with his wet nose, a comforting presence in the storm raging in my chest. I could feel his warmth, the steady pulse of his little heart, grounding me even as my own heart thudded unevenly. The air in the kitchen seemed thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for my next move. I pressed the papers to the table, tracing the numbers with a shaking finger, whispering fragments of disbelief. How? How could he? My voice trailed off into silence, swallowed by the stillness around me. Buddy leaned closer, resting his head on my lap, his eyes never leaving mine, as if demanding that I remember I was not alone in this, that even in this unimaginable moment, there was a witness to my pain. A sharp knock on the door startled me, slicing through the haze of shock. Dorothy. Always Dorothy. My heart leapt and sank at the same time. She had been a quiet anchor in my life, a neighbor and friend, who noticed the small shifts in my expressions and the weight I carried behind polite smiles. Melissa? Her voice, though soft, carried concern that felt almost tangible. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Could only manage a quiet response, my voice barely a whisper, quivering as if the words themselves were fragile. "Maybe I have." The truth hovered between us, unspoken but understood. She stepped inside, moving gently toward the kitchen, her presence a small light in the shadow that had settled over me. I noticed the familiar creak of her shoes on the wooden floor, the soft brush of her coat as she leaned slightly to glance at the papers. She did not judge, did not ask for explanation. She simply sat in silence beside me, offering what only a true friend could, companionship that did not demand answers, but simply offered steadfast presence. Night deepened around us, the kitchen illuminated by the muted glow of the overhead light and the occasional reflection from the metallic surfaces of the counters. I tried to breathe, to slow the rapid pace of my heart, but the weight of the discovery pressed relentlessly against my chest. And then, as if to punctuate the suffocating quiet, the familiar sound of a car pulling up outside made my stomach twist. Gerald. Late. As always, his timing impeccable in its cruelty. The scent hit me first, expensive perfume that clung to him like a mask, the olfactory equivalent of his arrogance. My chest tightened, a mix of fear, anger, and a heartbreak that cut through the years of subdued hope I had held on to. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady but low, the words carrying the quiet rage I struggled to contain. "Business dinner," he replied, dismissive, brushing past my words as though they were inconsequential. "Don't start." His tone was sharp yet lazy in its confidence. He assumed control, assumed that my shock and suspicion would bend under the weight of his authority. But this time, something in me had shifted. I felt a quiet, simmering determination begin to rise, subtle but undeniable. Buddy's growl echoed softly in the space between us, low and protective, the first time I had heard it directed outward rather than simply a playful nudge. His body stiffened beside me, ears alert, gaze unwavering on Gerald. That small sounder warning, a declaration of loyalty, stirred a strange, fierce strength in me. I realized that I was not the same woman who had set the table in hope earlier that day, timid and longing. I was someone who had glimpsed the truth, someone who had witnessed betrayal laid bare, someone who now had an ally who would not allow fear to dictate our actions. I pressed the bank statements close to my chest, inhaling deeply, feeling Buddy lean against me, and, for a moment, allowed myself to grieve. Grieve not just for the money, but for the years of trust, for the quiet moments stolen by indifference and deceit. And as I sat there, wrapped in the dim light, feeling the steady rhythm of Buddy's presence, I understood that this grief was only the beginning. There would be fear, yes, and doubt, but also clarity. There would be anger, yes, but also courage. The room seemed to shrink around me, the walls holding the echoes of Gerald's arrogance and Dorothy's quiet understanding, but within me, a new space opened, a space for resolve, for action, for reclaiming the life that had been so quietly stolen. I folded the papers carefully, almost reverently, tucking them back into the envelope. I looked down at Buddy, and his gaze met mine with an unspoken promise. We would face this together. I would not be alone in uncovering the depth of betrayal. I would not be powerless in the shadow of deceit. And as I sat there, heart still heavy but beating with a new, determined rhythm, I understood that the path forward would be long, fraught with challenges and pain, but also with moments of triumph, connection, and courage that I had not yet dared to imagine. Weeks had passed since the moment I uncovered the bank statements, and yet the fear and disbelief had never truly left me. Each morning I awoke with a small knot of dread in my chest, a whispering worry that Gerald and Patricia were always one step ahead, planning the next move in some cruel game I had only just begun to understand. Buddy had become my quiet anchor in these days of uncertainty, his soft fur and steady presence reminding me that I was not completely alone, even in a house where betrayal lingered like a shadow in every corner. I had watched Gerald's smug face and Patricia's sharp eyes too many times to pretend ignorance. The weight of their duplicity pressed down upon me. It was a cold, tangible pressure that no amount of morning sunlight or quiet cups of tea could dispel. I found myself drawn one night to the living room, the place where so many memories of quiet domestic life should have felt safe. But the room was different now. Shadows stretched across the furniture in the soft lamplight, and the faint tick of the wall clock seemed louder than usual, punctuating the silence in a way that made my nerves taut. I moved carefully, almost reverently, clutching a small voice recorder I had purchased in secret, a device so innocuous that no one could suspect its purpose. My hands shook slightly, not from fear alone, but from the enormity of what I was about to attempt. I placed it behind a framed photograph on the mantel, a simple landscape that had once seemed comforting. The recorder nestled there silently, hidden from view, its tiny red light extinguished in the dim glow of the room. I stepped back and exhaled softly, heart pounding, waiting, willing, dreading what would come next. I could hear the faint sound of Gerald and Patricia in the kitchen, their voices light, laced with the casual confidence of those who believe themselves untouchable. The smell of wine drifted through the air, rich and intoxicating, mingling with the faint undertone of Gerald's expensive cologne. Later, I replayed the recording, each word slicing through the fragile cocoon of my courage. Their laughter was easy, unguarded, and utterly chilling. Patricia's voice came first, silky and cold, a venomous sweetness that made my stomach turn. Once she's declared incompetent, she said, the casual cruelty in her tone making my hands tremble. The house, Mom's inheritance, everything's ours. My eyes filled with tears and I pressed my palms to my face, feeling the tremor of betrayal as if it had physically shaken my bones. And then, Gerald's voice. Smooth, confident, chilling in its calculation. The dementia angle is perfect. A few more incidents and no one will question it. The words hung in the room like smoke, curling around me, suffocating. My vision blurred and I felt the sharp, unbearable ache of heartbreak, not just for myself, but for the years of trust I had extended, the love I had believed in, the family I thought I knew. Buddy pressed his head into my leg, warm and steady, grounding me in the moment, reminding me that there was still loyalty, still innocence, still love left in this fractured world. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching Buddy close, his soft fur pressing against my cheek as I tried to breathe through the storm of disbelief. My mind raced, a torrent of thoughts colliding with one another. What would I do? How could I fight back against this conspiracy, so meticulous, so cruel, so unimaginable? I had always believed that home was a sanctuary, that family was a refuge, and now I realized that both had been illusions, carefully constructed by those who were supposed to love me. The grief, the betrayal, the fear, they collided within me, leaving me trembling, but beneath it all, a quiet ember of determination began to glow. I would not allow this to stand. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over Eleanor's contact, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, thick and suffocating. I dialed her number, listening to the soft beeps as the line connected, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. When she answered, her voice was calm, almost impossibly steady, a steel hidden beneath decades of experience. "Melissa Hayes," I whispered, voice breaking. "Eleanor, I need your help." "They want to take everything." Eleanor's response was measured, deliberate, a cold clarity that cut through the haze of fear and despair. "Melissa, this is elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. We do this my way, quietly and surgically." Her words carried a weight, a promise of method and precision, a lifeline cast into the turbulent waters of my shattered world. In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. Fragile, but real. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be fear, doubt, and danger lurking in the shadows. But Eleanor's calm confidence reminded me that I was not powerless, that I had an ally who understood the depth of the treachery I faced, and that together we could navigate this darkness. I held Buddy close, feeling the warmth of his body, the quiet strength in his presence. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that I might survive this, that I might fight back, that I might reclaim the life that had been so quietly stolen. The living room, once a place of ordinary domesticity, had become a battlefield, and I was ready to step onto it. My hands still shook, my heart still raced, but I was no longer just the woman they thought they could manipulate. I was awake. I was aware. And with Eleanor by my side, I would not be defeated. The days that followed our discovery of Gerald and Patricia's betrayal became a blur of quiet action, painstaking documentation, and the slow, steady cultivation of courage I had almost forgotten I possessed. Eleanor guided me gently but firmly, her experience a lantern in the darkness of my fear and uncertainty. Each morning I sat at the dining table, Buddy at my feet, and photographed every document I could find. Bank statements, utility bills, letters, anything that might speak the truth of what had been happening behind closed doors. The camera clicked softly in the quiet room, a small sound that felt like defiance. A testament that I was reclaiming control over the pieces of my life they had tried to manipulate. I began wearing a tiny body cam under my cardigan, its weight barely noticeable, but its presence a quiet reassurance. Buddy seemed to sense it too, nuzzling against my side as if to offer encouragement. On our daily walks to the community center, I felt the rhythm of normalcy punctuated by purpose. The crisp air filled my lungs as I watched Buddy bound ahead, his tail a cheerful flag of loyalty, and I allowed myself the smallest, most daring smile, feeling that flicker of life reawakening in me. Every step, every small accomplishment, every quiet victory in observing and recording the truth felt like a stone laid in the foundation of a new life, one I was determined to build with my own hands. Director James, a kind man of 55 who had quietly observed my volunteer work for years, became an unexpected ally in this delicate battle. He handed me attendance logs, glowing performance reviews, and words of encouragement that warmed me against the chill of fear that still lingered from my family's deception. Each document, each record of consistent engagement and contribution became a tool, a shield, and a sword. I felt a strange pride in this careful accumulation of proof, pride not born of arrogance, but of the quiet strength that came from knowing I was asserting my truth. The day of the evaluation arrived, carrying with it a weight that pressed at my chest like a physical presence. Dr. Harrison, Patricia's hand-picked psychiatrist, entered the room with the faint aroma of sterile antiseptic and professional detachment. I felt my heart quicken, not from fear alone, but from the anticipation of proving not only my competence, but my dignity and autonomy. Every step I took toward the table felt measured, deliberate, as if each movement was a statement. I am here. I am aware. I am present. When the evaluation began, I answered every question with careful precision, drawing on memories, experiences, and knowledge I had cultivated over a lifetime. Each word was deliberate, each pause intentional, and yet I felt a subtle tremor beneath the surface, a whisper of vulnerability that spoke of the countless moments I had spent doubting my own worth. I slid my volunteer records across the table with steady hands, the papers a tangible manifestation of my perseverance, of the quiet hours of effort that no one had acknowledged until now. Dr. Harrison's expression shifted subtly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Mrs. Peterson, you're sharper than most people half your age," he said softly, a note of admiration mingling with professional assessment. "Who requested this evaluation?" The words hung in the air, heavy and ironic, and I allowed myself a quiet, restrained laugh, the first real laugh in weeks. "My loving family," I replied, my voice calm but carrying the weight of restrained bitterness. The simple phrasing belied the complexity of emotion coiled beneath it: pain, disbelief, sorrow, and the faint glimmer of vindication that had begun to take root. Buddy pressed against my leg beneath the table, his small body a grounding force, reminding me that I was not alone in this room, not alone in this struggle, and that my determination was both seen and shared. As Dr. Harrison continued his questions, I noticed how the room seemed to shift subtly, the air less oppressive, the faint shadows along the walls lighter. I realized in a quiet, astonishing moment that my efforts were paying off. Each answer I gave, each document I presented, was a small act of defiance against the betrayal that had loomed over me like a storm cloud. My confidence grew in tandem with a deeper understanding. Competence was not merely about intelligence or memory, but about resilience, about the courage to stand upright in the face of deliberate deception, about the quiet strength to claim my place in a world that had tried to diminish me. When the session concluded, I rose slowly from the chair, feeling a sense of calm triumph, fragile but undeniable. Buddy's tail wagged softly, brushing against my ankle in approval, and I allowed myself to breathe deeply, inhaling the subtle warmth of the room, the faint scent of paper and polished wood, and the quiet satisfaction of having faced an orchestrated challenge with grace and acuity. Eleanor's words from earlier echoed in my mind. Methodical, precise, surgical. And I understood with a newfound clarity that the path forward would require patience, courage, and unyielding resolve, but it was a path I could now walk with dignity. I left the community center that afternoon, Buddy at my side, feeling the sun on my face and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. The world seemed more expansive, more navigable, and though fear and uncertainty still lingered, they no longer held dominion over me. I had proven, to myself and to those who sought to diminish me, that my mind was mine, my life was mine, and my voice, though soft, carried the power of truth. And in that quiet triumph, I felt the first true stirrings of hope, the delicate, luminous promise that I could, indeed, reclaim not only what had been taken, but the strength and dignity that had been quietly eroded over the years. The discovery hit me like a silent avalanche. Eleanor, with the precision and calm that had become her hallmark, laid the documents in front of me. My eyes traced the lines of ink, the familiar loops of my own handwriting forged so convincingly that it sent a chill down my spine. 6 months ago, Gerald had signed my name to a power of attorney, a legal leash he could use to control every corner of my life, every penny of my existence. The weight of it crushed me for a moment, a sharp, hot pang of betrayal I could feel in my bones. I had known deceit in small doses, in the casual dismissals, the flippant cruelty, but this was premeditated, intimate, and meticulous. My hands shook as I picked up the papers, clutching them as though they might somehow absorb the weight of the treachery. "Melissa," Eleanor said gently, her voice the steel beneath the softness I had come to trust, "we need to see the full picture. We need to understand who else is involved and how deep this goes." Her eyes, steady and unwavering, held mine. In that moment, I realized that the fight ahead would not be fought with anger alone. It would require patience, observation, and a resolve sharpened by the truth we now possessed. That evening, Dorothy and I moved quietly through the fading light, the city's streets cloaked in shadows. Our footsteps were muffled against the pavement, and I felt the familiar twinge of nervous anticipation that came with every step toward confrontation. Dorothy's presence was a quiet reassurance, her soft grip on my arm grounding me as I navigated the unknown. We followed Gerald at a distance, careful to remain unseen, hearts pounding as the layers of deception began to unravel before us. When he entered a building that gleamed with modern luxury, I felt a shiver run through me. The door opened and a younger woman, Vanessa, stepped forward, her face alight with affection, pressing a kiss to Gerald's cheek with a casual intimacy that made my stomach turn. I saw it all, every smile, every touch. The comfortable ease of two people living in a world constructed at the expense of my trust, my resources, my life. The sight of them together, laughing quietly, unaware of the eyes that witnessed their duplicity, ignited a cold, steady fury within me. We waited in the shadows, silent and patient, as minutes stretched into an hour. I clutched my coat around me, feeling Buddy's absence in the quiet, wishing for the small comfort of his presence, for the grounding warmth that had kept me steady through so many recent storms. And then, Patricia emerged from the same building, phone in hand, laughter spilling freely across the street. She was oblivious, radiant in her confidence. her joy at the trivialities of life stark against the dark truth she had helped orchestrate. Every laugh she let loose felt like a knife twisted in my chest, the proof of their collusion undeniable and brazen. I felt a tremor, a quiet shaking of both hands and heart. The world seemed to narrow to the point where I could see nothing but their faces, their smiles, their duplicity. I thought of the years I had given, the trust I had extended, the love I had hoped for, and the slow, crushing realization that it had been squandered in the service of greed. My chest tightened, a heavy, constricting pressure, and I struggled to breathe through the haze of grief and disbelief. Yet beneath it all, a new, icy clarity took hold. I had been betrayed, yes, but I was not broken. My voice, when it emerged, was quiet, precise, cold, the words sliding across the narrow gap between thought and sound. They've been living off me together. I could hear the echo of my own words, the faint tremor of controlled rage and hurt. Dorothy's hand brushed against mine, a grounding touch, and I felt a glimmer of resolve solidify. This was not simply about money. It was about the betrayal of trust, the invasion of my life, and the attempt to steal my autonomy. We returned home in silence, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I could feel Dorothy's eyes on me, patient, understanding, a silent promise that I was not alone in the path I had chosen. In the quiet of the car, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the knot of pain unravel slightly, replaced by the first threads of determination. Buddy, if he were with me, would have nudged my hand, his eyes steady, his presence a reminder that I had allies, that loyalty and love still existed even in a world poisoned by deceit. Once inside, I set the documents before me, the memory of Gerald and Patricia's casual betrayal fresh in my mind. The pain of betrayal is sharp, and it can linger like a shadow across every memory of shared life. But I felt something else now, a quiet, fierce resolve, a commitment to reclaim what had been taken, not with anger alone, but with careful, deliberate action. I understood that the fight ahead would be long and painful, but the clarity I had gained was a lantern in the darkness. I would not simply endure their deceit, I would confront it, unravel it, and emerge from the shadows of betrayal with strength, dignity, and a voice that could not be silenced. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the life I would rebuild. The quiet ache of hurt remained, but it was tempered by a growing awareness of my own resilience. I could feel it pulsing, faint but persistent, like the steady beat of a drum calling me forward. Gerald and Patricia had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had ignited a determination that would not be contained. I was no longer the woman who had sat quietly at the dining table, waiting for acknowledgement. I was awake, I was aware, and I was ready. And with Dorothy by my side, with Eleanor guiding the path ahead, and with Buddy's loyal presence always near, I knew that the world, no matter how treacherous, could not crush the strength that had been quietly growing inside me for all these years. The evening air in my living room was thick with tension, a quiet hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I had asked Gerald, Patricia, and Ryan to join me for what I had carefully labeled a family meeting, the words deliberately casual, masking the careful orchestration of the night to come. Every detail had been considered. The hidden cameras, the witnesses, the documents laid out as carefully as chess pieces on a board. I could feel Buddy curled up at my feet, his presence a grounding warmth, and I found that even his quiet, steady breathing offered a strange reassurance. As Gerald and Patricia entered, their expressions polite but suspicious, I felt a flicker of something deep within me, a mixture of fear and exhilaration, a quiet thrill that I had not felt in years. Ryan, standing slightly behind Patricia, gave me a curious glance, unaware of the full gravity of the room. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the evening pressing against my chest, the pulse of adrenaline mingling with the tremor of long-suppressed emotion. I placed the documents on the table carefully, sliding both the forged and real copies before them. My hands moved with deliberate slowness, a subtle assertion of control, and I allowed my gaze to sweep over them, taking in the glint of greed in Patricia's eyes. The subtle shift in Gerald's posture, the rigid unease that betrayed his usual calm arrogance. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, my voice quiet but deliberate, carrying a weight I had not needed to speak before. "Maybe I should sign the power of attorney tonight." My words hung in the air, a siren call of deception that I alone knew to be bait. Patricia's eyes gleamed, and I could almost hear the greedy calculations forming behind them. The way she leaned slightly forward, a smile playing on her lips, made my stomach twist, not with fear, but with cold, sharp awareness. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the first step in a long, carefully orchestrated counterattack. I pressed the play button on the recorder, my fingers steady, and let the device speak the truth that my own voice trembled to express. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the recorder as Patricia's voice filled the space, words that cut through the veneer of civility like a knife. "Once we get her declared incompetent." The words echoed in the corners of the room, and I could feel the walls themselves listening, bearing witness to the revelation. Ryan's reaction was immediate, his face draining of color, his disbelief vocalized in a sharp, horrified exclamation. "Patricia, what the hell is this?" His voice trembled with the mix of betrayal and moral outrage, a raw human response I recognized all too well. Gerald's reaction was more controlled, more dangerous. He lunged for the recorder, his movements sharp and desperate, a predator caught off guard by the very trap he thought he had laid. James, calm and unyielding, stepped in, blocking Gerald with a measured strength that carried authority without threat. Gerald froze, the sudden restraint against his force leaving him unbalanced, and I felt a small, almost imperceptible thrill at the sight of him halted, powerless in a situation he could not control. Eleanor stepped forward then, her presence commanding, her voice clear and unwavering. "Eleanor Hayes, retired attorney at law," she announced, the sound cutting through the thick tension like steel. "Everything in this room is recorded with multiple witnesses. You're done, Gerald." The weight of her authority was palpable, a tidal wave of certainty that rolled over the room, leaving no corner untouched. At that moment, the hidden witnesses began to emerge from the kitchen. Dorothy, her eyes bright with quiet pride. James, calm and watchful. Dr. Harrison, composed yet visibly impressed, and Eleanor's quiet assurance radiating outward. The room seemed to contract, the air dense with exposure, with the undeniable weight of truth. Patricia's face crumpled, her earlier confidence dissolving into uncontrollable tears. Her sobs echoed softly, mingling with Gerald's shock, his face turning ghost white as the full reality of their exposure settled upon him. I felt Buddy press closer against my leg, a reassuring warmth, and I allowed myself to take a deep breath. Relief mingled with the adrenaline still coursing through me, a strange cocktail of triumph, grief, and vindication. I thought of the months of careful planning, the hours spent documenting, observing and gathering proof, the quiet nights with Eleanor guiding me, and I realized that each painstaking step had brought me here, not to vengeance, but to justice, not merely to confrontation, but to truth revealed. The room held us all in a moment suspended between past betrayal and present revelation. I felt my hands relax, my chest unclench, as though the weight of years of manipulation and deceit had begun to lift. Gerald and Patricia had underestimated me, thought my age and perceived vulnerability made me an easy mark. But the quiet determination that had been growing inside me for months now blossomed fully. I was no longer a passive witness in my own life. I was awake, aware, and prepared to reclaim everything that had been threatened. I looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had supported Dorothy, silent and steadfast. James, meticulous and dependable. Eleanor, unwavering, and brilliant. Dr. Harrison, observing with quiet respect, and I realized that the path forward, while still fraught with difficulty, would be walked with allies who believed in truth as fiercely as I did. Buddy wagged his tail softly at my feet, and I felt a surge of warmth and gratitude, and understanding that in this moment I was not alone. The tears and shock around me were not mine alone to bear, and yet I allowed myself a quiet, private smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt the fragile, luminous stirrings of hope, of justice, and of reclamation. The night had shifted. The balance had changed. And though the road ahead would be long, full of challenge and careful navigation, I knew that we had crossed the threshold. The counterattack had begun, and this time, the forces arrayed against me would find that the quiet, deliberate strength of a determined heart is not so easily broken. The night of the family meeting left me in a strange liminal space, suspended between disbelief, relief, and an exhaustion so deep it seemed to seep into my bones. Gerald and Patricia's faces, frozen in shock and shame, replayed in my mind with an almost surreal quality. I could not stop the memory of Gerald's ghost-white expression, the way Patricia's tears had traced delicate lines down her cheeks, the quiet satisfaction of finally seeing the truth laid bare. Yet the room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were carrying the residue of all the years of manipulation, deceit, and silent cruelty. I went to bed that night with Buddy curled against my side, his warmth a small comfort amid the lingering tremors of adrenaline and disbelief. Sleep came in fits, broken by flashes of what had just occurred, by the echoes of Patricia's recorded voice, and by the certainty that my life had been irrevocably altered, but not for the worse. Somehow, despite the fear, the betrayal, and the deep wounds, a fragile sense of hope had begun to bloom. By morning, the world had shifted in subtle but powerful ways. Ryan, Patricia's husband, filed for separation that very night, a decision that rippled through the fabric of our intertwined lives. I learned later from the careful whispers of neighbors and the quiet confirmations from Eleanor that Gerald had been served with divorce papers and a restraining order. The thought of him, accustomed to controlling every detail, now facing the legal walls closing in around him, made my chest tighten, not with joy alone, but with a complex mixture of relief, lingering sadness, and a profound sense of justice. I remember sitting in the living room, Buddy resting his head on my knee, when Eleanor called. Her voice on the other end of the line was calm, authoritative, yet laced with excitement, an emotion she never allowed herself to display openly, but which I felt in the timbre of her words. "Sit down," she instructed softly. "Your parents' trust? It's worth 3 times what you thought over $7 million. Gerald's been hiding the real statements for years." I felt my hands tremble as I processed her words. 3 times. Over $7 million. The enormity of it struck me in waves, each one heavier and more disbelieving than the last. I could not speak immediately. The world tilted on its axis, spinning with the realization of what had been stolen and what had finally been reclaimed. Buddy nudged my hand with his nose, a quiet, grounding presence, and I reached down, feeling his fur beneath my fingers, letting the warmth and loyalty of this small, living creature anchor me amidst the storm of emotion. Tears came unbidden, not of joy alone, but of release, of grief for the years lost, for the quiet erosion of trust I had endured silently, for the manipulations that had attempted to rewrite my life without my consent. I thought of my parents, their love for me untainted by the deceit that Gerald had woven, and a profound respect for their foresight swelled within me. The trust had always been more than money. It was a testament to their belief in my strength, my integrity, and my ability to endure. I sank into the sofa, letting the information wash over me slowly, piece by piece. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating, yet tempered by a tender sorrow for what had been. Every document Eleanor had uncovered, every careful step we had taken together. Every small act of defiance and courage had culminated in this revelation. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of lies and manipulation, was now laid bare, unassailable and undeniable. Buddy shifted, curling closer, pressing his head into my hand. I found myself whispering to him soft words of gratitude, reassurance, and quiet triumph. "We've done it, Buddy," I murmured. "We've reclaimed what was ours. What was meant to be ours all along." His soft gaze met mine, intelligent and understanding, and in that moment, I felt the full weight of companionship, of loyalty, and of shared endurance. Eleanor continued to speak softly on the phone, outlining the next steps, the legal avenues, and the strategies that would ensure Gerald could never again manipulate, control, or endanger me. Every word she spoke reinforced the sense of safety that had been absent for so long, a protective cocoon I had long yearned for but scarcely allowed myself to imagine. The fight was far from over, yet I could feel, in the marrow of my bones, that the scales were beginning to balance. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to envision a future unshackled by fear and deceit. A future where I could walk freely, make choices unbound by hidden manipulations, and live with the dignity, respect, and autonomy that had been quietly stripped from me. I imagined Buddy bounding ahead on our walks, the sun on our faces, the gentle rhythm of ordinary days reclaimed from the shadows. I thought of Eleanor, Dorothy, James, and Dr. Harrison, all the quiet, steadfast allies whose loyalty and wisdom had carried me through this ordeal. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the tears fall freely, a release of tension, grief, and fear, and allowed myself a private smile of hope. The tables had turned. Gerald's deceit had been exposed. The power he sought to wield over me had been stripped away, and now, for the first time in many long years, I could feel the gentle stirrings of possibility of renewal, of dignity restored, and of a life reclaimed not just in material terms, but in the profound, unassailable truth of my own worth and agency. The room was quiet, except for Buddy's soft breathing, my own inhalations, and the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. The weight of history and betrayal had not vanished, but it had shifted. No longer a chain to hold me down, it had become a foundation from which I could rise. The truth was mine, the trust was intact, and the life that had been stolen from me, piece by piece, was beginning to be restored. And for the first time in years, I felt a lightness in my chest, a warmth in my heart, and the luminous, fragile, and unshakable promise of hope. The days that followed the revelation of Gerald and Patricia's deceit felt surreal, as though I were moving through a dream in which every step had been carefully choreographed yet utterly foreign to me. Eleanor's calm, unshakable presence became my anchor as her investigator. Meticulous and thorough, began to peel back the layers of deception that had enshrouded my life for years. I sat across from Eleanor in my kitchen, Buddy at my feet, his head resting on my shoe, eyes watchful and perceptive. There was a quiet tension in the air, an almost tangible anticipation as we awaited news from the investigation that would determine the next chapter of our lives. The investigator's findings were more harrowing than I had dared to imagine. That texts, casual in tone yet chilling in content, had been exchanged between Gerald and Patricia. Words I never wanted to read. Plans I never wanted to contemplate. They spoke of accidents and timing, of ways to ensure that I would be incapacitated, vulnerable, and removed from the life I had built, from the trust that my parents had left in my hands. The casual cruelty with which they had plotted against me made my stomach twist with a mixture of horror and disbelief. How could they have turned so completely from the family I thought I knew, the man I had loved, the sister I had trusted? Eleanor's voice, steady and unflinching, cut through the fog of my shock. "Melissa," she said quietly, but with an edge of steel that brooked no argument, This is attempted murder conspiracy." Her words hung in the room, dense with gravity, heavy enough to press against my chest. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine, my hands clutching the edge of the table, Buddy nudging my knee as if to remind me that I was not alone, that the small comforts of loyalty and companionship were still my refuge in a world that had tried to betray me utterly. The call from the police came that evening. Their voices were brisk, professional, yet beneath the formality, I sensed the acknowledgement of the severity of what they were about to do. Gerald was to be arrested at his apartment, and Patricia had been located at the airport attempting to flee the consequences of her actions. I could feel the tremor of tension in my chest, the combination of relief, fear, and sorrow twisting together into a knot I could not unravel. This was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment steeped in a complexity that few could comprehend. I watched from the living room window, Buddy at my side, as officers approached Gerald's apartment. The scene unfolded with the precision of a slow, inevitable truth. Gerald's face was pale, his composure shattered, his hands cuffed in the back as he was led away. There was no dramatic shouting, no desperate pleading, only the quiet, haunting recognition that his control had ended, that the carefully constructed edifice of lies and manipulation had finally collapsed. The clicking of the handcuffs as they locked around his wrists was a sound I will never forget, a sound heavy with consequence, yet tempered with a profound sorrow. At the airport, news came of Patricia's apprehension. She had been caught attempting to board a plane, an almost frantic bid for escape, her luggage abandoned, her carefully curated appearance unable to disguise the desperation beneath. The thought of her stricken with the realization that she could not outrun justice made my chest ache, not with satisfaction, but with the grief of understanding just how far my family had been willing to go, how deeply they had sought to harm me. I sat in the quiet of my home, the hum of the city around me muted by the gravity of the evening. Buddy's head rested gently on my lap, his warm weight a grounding presence, a reminder that life could still offer softness and comfort even after the harshest betrayals. I traced my fingers along his fur, allowing myself to breathe, to feel the slow, deliberate pulse of a life reclaimed, even as my heart carried the sorrow of the pain inflicted by those I had once trusted most. The profound sadness I felt was a recognition of the human capacity for betrayal, of the thin line that sometimes separates love from cruelty. It was the sorrow of understanding that the people we think we know may harbor darkness we cannot imagine, that trust is a fragile, precious gift that can be violated in the most intimate ways. And yet, in the same breath, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of resilience, the awareness that despite everything, I had survived, that I had not been broken, and that the bonds of loyalty, friendship, and courage had carried me through. I reflected on Eleanor's guidance, on Dorothy's unwavering support, on James's careful watchfulness, on Dr. Harrison's quiet belief in my strength, and on the small, constant comfort of Buddy's companionship. Each of them had helped me navigate the treacherous waters of deceit, had given me the courage to see through the shadows, and had shown me that justice, though delayed, could still be realized. Their presence, their steady belief in truth and integrity, had transformed my fear into determination, my despair into careful, deliberate action. That night, as the city lights flickered through the living room windows, I felt the weight of the world shift subtly but unmistakably. Gerald and Patricia had been restrained, their attempts to harm me thwarted, their schemes exposed. But the victory was tempered with the quiet ache of grief, the sorrow for what had been lost, the recognition of the emotional toll of betrayal so intimate and severe. I held Buddy close, his steady breathing against my chest a reminder of the enduring presence of loyalty, of quiet love, of steadfast companionship. In the solitude of that evening, I allowed myself to feel every emotion fully, the fear, the relief, and the subtle flicker of hope that promised renewal. I knew the path ahead would still hold challenges, that the legal processes, the healing of trust, and the reclamation of peace would take time. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to imagine a future not dominated by fear, but by cautious optimism, by the gentle certainty that I had the strength to endure, to rebuild, and to reclaim the dignity and autonomy that had been so callously threatened. The handcuffs clicking shut had not brought triumph. They had brought clarity, resolution, and a profound recognition of human fragility, resilience, and the quiet, unassailable strength that could rise from even the deepest wounds. I sat in that quiet, held by the presence of those who had stood beside me, and let myself breathe, finally feeling the faint, luminous stirrings of hope and the promise of new beginnings. The months that followed the arrests of Gerald and Patricia unfolded in a strange, surreal rhythm. Life seemed both unbearably heavy and filled with a peculiar, tentative light. The trial lasted 3 months, a slow, methodical exposure of the lies, deceit, and deliberate malice that had shadowed my life. Each day in the courtroom, I sat quietly, Buddy at my side, feeling the intensity of every word, every gesture, every witness testimony. I noticed the small things, the way Gerald's hands trembled ever so slightly when confronted with his own handwriting, the way Patricia avoided eye contact when evidence proved her complicity. There was no gloating in my heart, only a quiet, steady focus, a determination to witness truth prevail. The courtroom became a space of profound reflection. I saw the faces of others who had been hurt by similar betrayals, and I felt an unspoken kinship with them. Their presence, their courage to testify, to share their pain, lent me a quiet strength I could not have summoned alone. I realized, with a mixture of awe and sorrow, how many lives had been silently eroded by those who abuse trust, who manipulate love and loyalty for their own gain. It was humbling, heartbreaking, and galvanizing all at once. When the verdict was delivered, I felt a complex surge of emotions. Gerald received 6 years. Patricia, 4. The words resonated in the courtroom, a mixture of justice, finality, and the acknowledgement of human frailty. I remember stepping outside afterward, the sunlight hitting my face with a warmth that felt almost miraculous. Reporters approached, microphones extended, cameras flashing. The local headline read, "64-year-old woman outsmarts family's murder plot." I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of public attention press lightly against my shoulders, tempered by the deeper, private satisfaction of survival and vindication. Yet even as the legal chapter closed, I understood that the work of rebuilding had only just begun. I could not simply return to the life I had known before. The contours of trust, safety, and human connection had been reshaped irrevocably. I felt a deep need to transform my pain into purpose, to ensure that others who had endured similar betrayals would not have to navigate the darkness alone. With Buddy at my side, I began the delicate work of creating a support group at the community center for survivors of elder abuse. Each meeting was a quiet testament to courage, a safe haven for voices that had long been silenced by fear, shame, or manipulation. Vanessa became a surprising, comforting presence in these meetings. She had been one of Gerald's other victims, caught in the web of lies and deceit that had defined my family's darkest moments. Our connection was tentative at first, formed of shared pain and cautious trust, but over time it grew into a profound, supportive friendship. We spoke in hushed tones, our conversations layered with laughter, tears, and the quiet acknowledgement of survival. The bond that emerged was not born of extravagance or ease, but of endurance, empathy, and the shared determination to reclaim our lives. The creation of the Buddy Fund was my next step, a tangible expression of purpose and restitution. I wanted to ensure that seniors who faced manipulation, deceit, or abuse would have access to legal aid, guidance, and advocacy. Naming the fund after Buddy, who had been my steadfast companion through every moment of fear, discovery, and confrontation, felt right a reminder that even small, loyal presences can carry immense weight and provide profound support. Setting up the fund required diligence, collaboration with attorneys, and hours of careful planning. But each step reinforced the sense of agency I had worked so hard to reclaim. In the quiet evenings, I often sat on the porch, Buddy resting at my feet, and reflected on how much had changed in such a short span. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was tempered by gratitude for those who had supported me, for the resilience I had discovered within myself, and for the small but transformative victories that marked each day. I thought of Eleanor, Dorothy, James, and Dr. Harrison, all of whom had been quiet pillars in the storm. And I realized that the threads of loyalty, compassion, and justice were what had carried me through. The support group meetings became a sanctuary not just for others, but for me. Hearing stories of pain, resilience, and the gradual reclaiming of autonomy reminded me that while betrayal can cut deeply, it cannot extinguish the human spirit. I saw courage mirrored in every face, compassion expressed in every gesture, and the quiet power of connection flourish in ways I had not anticipated. Vanessa and I often exchanged glances across the room, understanding without words the long, winding path that had led us to this place, and the fragile, luminous hope that had emerged from the wreckage. Establishing the Buddy Fund brought a different kind of satisfaction. I attended meetings with attorneys, advocated for seniors, and witnessed firsthand the relief and gratitude that comes when someone finally receives the support they deserve. Each letter, each phone call, each personal encounter reinforced the knowledge that the smallest actions, words spoken, documents filed, a hand offered in guidance could change lives profoundly. Buddy, as always, was there, his soft fur brushing against my arm, his presence a living reminder of loyalty, comfort, and the healing power of companionship. By the time the first newsletters of the Buddy Fund were circulated, by the time our community center meetings began to flourish with new attendees and shared stories, I realized something remarkable. The life I had rebuilt was not the same life I had lost, but it was perhaps richer, fuller, and imbued with meaning I had never before imagined. The pain, the betrayal, and the fear had shaped me, but they had not defined me. I had discovered resilience in the quietest, most unassuming places, in the gaze of Buddy, in Eleanor's calm guidance, in Vanessa's tentative friendship, in the simple act of offering support to another human being. One evening, as I walked home from the center, the soft glow of streetlights illuminating our path, Buddy trotting ahead of me, I felt the subtle, profound shift that had taken place within me. The journey of rebuilding and redemption was ongoing, yet every step carried me closer to a sense of wholeness I had once thought impossible. The world was still imperfect, betrayal still existed, and pain was never fully erased, but within the quiet, deliberate acts of compassion, justice, and human connection, I found a new foundation. And on that foundation, I could build a life of purpose, dignity, and above all, hope. 6 months had passed since the trial had ended, and in that time, life had begun to feel steadier, lighter, and yet infinitely richer. The months had not been without effort. There were countless meetings, advocacy sessions, and quiet, persistent work to ensure that the horrors I had endured would not be repeated in the lives of others. But now I stood in the grand chamber of the city council. Buddy perched loyally by my side in his official emotional support vest, his eyes bright with alert intelligence. The room hummed with a sense of purpose, a shared understanding that something meaningful was unfolding. The council members listened intently as I spoke, my voice firm but calm, carrying the weight of my experiences. The lessons learned through betrayal, fear, and perseverance. I recounted the insidious ways in which financial elder abuse can creep into a family, into homes, into the lives of those we trust the most. I spoke of Buddy, who had been a silent witness to my journey, whose warmth and loyalty had steadied me through moments of doubt and fear. I shared the story not for sympathy, not for recognition, but to illuminate the urgent need for safeguards, for laws that could protect seniors from manipulation, coercion, and fraud. When the council voted, unanimously passing the Peterson Protection Act, a quiet thrill ran through me, mingled with an almost overwhelming sense of relief. The act would establish new safeguards, ensuring that elders would have legal protection against financial exploitation, requiring clearer oversight for powers of attorney and stronger enforcement mechanisms. It was not a victory for one person alone. It was a victory for countless lives that would now be shielded from the kind of betrayal I had endured. I felt a deep swell of gratitude toward Eleanor, Dorothy, James, Dr. Harrison, and everyone who had helped me navigate the treacherous path to this moment. The following evening, my birthday party was held at the community center, now fully vibrant and bustling with life, laughter, and warmth. I could not help but feel a sense of poetic symmetry surrounded by friends, allies, and those who had shared in my journey. I realized that the very space that had once been a refuge for survivors of abuse had become a place of celebration, resilience, and hope. The community center unveiled a plaque in my honor, engraved with the words, "In recognition of Melissa Peterson's survivor, advocate, hero." I felt my throat tighten, the lump of emotion rising as I read the words aloud, my hand brushing along the polished wood, my gaze falling upon Buddy's steady, faithful eyes. Tears pricked the corners of my vision, not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude. I remembered the lonely nights, the quiet moments of fear and doubt, the hours spent painstakingly documenting evidence, and the small, courageous acts that had accumulated into this transformation. Every tear, every ache, every fearful glance toward the unknown had led me to this day. That night, we settled on the porch, the sun sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold, pink, and lavender. Buddy rested his head on my lap, a living emblem of loyalty, courage, and comfort. The gentle rhythm of his breathing against me, the soft brush of his fur beneath my fingers, and the warmth of the last golden light filtering through the trees filled me with a serenity I had not known for decades. I whispered to him softly, my voice carrying the weight of reflection and hope. "We fixed more than just a car, didn't we, Buddy?" His eyes met mine, intelligent and compassionate, and I imagined him understanding in a way that transcended words. It was true, we had rebuilt far more than an engine. We had rebuilt trust, security, and a sense of purpose that I had thought lost forever. The ringing of my phone broke the stillness, a familiar sound that brought with it the promise of new stories to tell, new voices to reach. I answered, smiling despite the lingering traces of emotion that clung to my chest. "Yes," I said warmly, "I'll do the interview. But first, let me tell you about the dog who saved my life." As I spoke, I felt the subtle power of my journey settle into a quiet, resilient rhythm. The pain of the past was not erased, but it had been transformed into a beacon of hope, of advocacy, and of compassion for others who might one day find themselves facing betrayal or fear. Buddy nudged my hand gently, and I realized that together, we had forged more than survival. We had created a legacy of courage, love, and unwavering loyalty. The evening deepened into night, the sky now painted in velvety indigo, and I allowed myself to breathe fully, to feel the weight of every triumph and tear, and to embrace the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. My heart was full, my purpose clear, and my resolve unshakable. I knew that each step forward would be a step toward protection, understanding, and advocacy for those whose voices were too often silenced. And now, dear friends, if you've been inspired by this journey, Please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and hope. Together, we can celebrate the quiet heroes, the loyal companions, and the power of truth and perseverance in every life.